People who've been kidnapped, how did you survive? I was kidnapped in my car, when I was 18. I had been stalked by the guy for at least a few days, saw the same truck follow me a couple times on my way to college campus. I was just about to get out of my car to go to a bookstore, and this guy jumps in the passenger seat with a gun. He made me drive out of town to a remote area where his truck was parked. Never found out how he followed me to bookstore without the truck. He wanted to keep the gun on me while he got out of the car because I had a mace thing on my keychain. As he was backing out, he slipped and lost his footing, and I took off in the car. I drove straight to the police station. He was never caught. Almost. Age of 11. Do not go to second location. Fight like hell to stay in the first. Even if you get taken anyway, raising a huge noise can cause a witness to come see what's happening to you and they can report it. I was on my way home from school for lunch and some guy in a small quarter-ton truck gets out, claims he's a police officer and tells me to get in the truck. Right away I'm thinking I'm not going anywhere with this clown. He claimed to be a cop and I asked, "Where's your badge?" While he's launching into this rant about how much trouble I'll be in if I don't do as he says, in my head I'm thinking all we have to do is bolt behind the house right next to us. That neighborhood had a whole mess of pathways that went all over the place. If we make it to that, there's no way that guy is gonna catch us. I straight up told him I'm not going anywhere with you. That caught him off guard, like he wasn't used to someone challenging him. He got this scared look on his face and got back in his truck. Then he tries laying this bullshit on us. He's some secret undercover cop and don't tell anyone he's there. Yeah right, my friend and we both ran home and told our parents first thing. They called the cops and we gave a full description of both the truck and the guy. The friend who was with me actually remembered the license plate. After that I couldn't tell you what happened. We never got an update from the police and never saw that guy ever again. I was kidnapped way before my memories formed, so this is all from my parents and the police report. Basically, a lady in the nursing ward decided to give me a spicy adoption by hiding me in some sheets and taking me out of the hospital. She was tracked down a few days later and I was handed back to my parents. She didn't mistreat me. Apparently I was a healthy, normal child and she even bought the expensive stuff in order to take care of me. I got to meet her in my teens. I asked her, why me? And it was because my family hadn't done the paperwork for me correctly, so I was easier to slip out and potentially give her more time to disappear with me. I got very, very lucky. The two men who kidnapped me from a bus stop, I was 16, had clearly done so with others before. They'd removed the door handles from the back seat doors, so when I tried to make my way out at a red light I couldn't get the door open. I'm pretty sure they intended to kill me after they raped me. They drove me to an abandoned gas station and began assaulting me, but about an hour into the experience a police car drove up to check out what was happening. The man in the back seat with me at that time threatened to slit my throat if I screamed, while his partner got out and convinced the cop that I was his niece, and that he and my dad brought me out to talk to me. He said they needed to set me straight because I'd been acting out. The cop insisted they leave the station right then, and he followed our car back to the highway. They got so worried he'd remember them if my body turned up the next day that they decided to release me right then. I got thrown down a gravel embankment along the highway, and ran in the dark to a nearby open restaurant. I will never forget lying there in the wet grass after coming to rest at the bottom of the embankment, gazing up at a sky filled with stars, and realizing that, holy shit, I was somehow still alive. Injured and anguished and violated and sorrowful, but alive and able to find a way through the trauma. I was very, very lucky. I was kidnapped at gunpoint along with my younger brother and my early 20s mother when I was in kindergarten. My father, approximately 40 years old, hadn't taken the divorce well and already had some psychiatric illness, so he forced us all into his truck and drove us from California to Mexico. At the time my parents told us kids that we were taking a family trip. I remember the drive, shopping in a street market, and being greeted by the flashing lights of police cars when we eventually returned to the States. The police were nice and let us sit in the police car. I remember being excited about that. The next thing I remember was coming home to dead pets, I think just 2 mice, but still. Then being upset that I had missed picture day in school when I saw the other kids receiving their photos. I'm not sure how long we were in Mexico, but maybe that'll help set the time frame. I'm not sure what would have happened if my father hadn't decided to take us back. I was kidnapped when I was 7. It was by a very drug-ridden family member who told me he was bringing me out for ice cream. He left me on a bench outside of a bar when the bartender told him he couldn't bring kids in. It was a dirty biker bar in Las Vegas during the 90s. I was young, scared, and didn't fully comprehend the situation. I was confused why WR didn't go to an ice cream shop. The family member came out with 2 men that fully fucking terrified me. One of them touched my curly bright red hair and smiled wide. I remember not knowing what to do, so I started singing Joan Osborne's "What If God Was One of Us." They got freaked when I wouldn't stop singing and walked back in the bar. I was definitely a weird kid, but singing as self-defense was kind of smart. I was left alone on the bench again when a man walked up and asked me where my parents were. I told him I didn't get ice cream and wanted to go back to my mom, but my family member wouldn't let me. He walked in the bar but came out just a minute later and sat with me until the police arrived. 20 years later my mom saw that family member for the first time. He was on end-of-life hospice care but made it to another family member's funeral. When everyone was filtering out, he was waiting on the bus home when my mom punched him in the face. I love my mom. Almost kidnapped at Oktoberfest in Germany when I was 15. A girl's phone was stolen and I saw the people who took it. When she asked me if I knew who it was, I said yes, and she grabbed my arm and pulled me outside of the tent we were in. She kept asking me questions of what they looked like, but I felt odd and couldn't remember. A man drove up in a black caravan and asked what was the matter. He has a creepy smile and it felt like he knew the girl. They also coincidentally knew Russian. Luckily, my mom followed us and ran out of the tent we were in and pushed me behind her. When the man said he was just checking on us, my mom lifted her fists and told me to run. I was in shock and couldn't move. Although we were in the back outside of the tent, there were still people who worked at the fest around. The man smiled and took the girl, who we later realized was the scout, and drove off. This was the scariest almost kidnapping I had ever encountered, and I love my mom for her willingness to sacrifice her safety for me to escape. It makes me tear up thinking about it. I was kidnapped at 17 by goons my parents hired to take me to rehab when they found out I smoked pot. I was eating dinner with my parents when all of a sudden they got up and walked out of the room with no explanation. Then a few seconds later 2 huge guys showed up out of nowhere, blocking both the exits to the kitchen, and told me to come with them. Since they didn't identify themselves at all or tell me what was going on, I assumed I was being kidnapped for real, so I grabbed a kitchen stool and started swinging. I took one down, but the other guy tackled and handcuffed me. After they forced me into a car, they explained who they were and that they were taking me to a wilderness program in Georgia. We were in DC, so I spent the next few hours apologizing, sucking up to them, and basically trying to get them as much on my side as possible. It worked because they stopped for food and told me they would take off the handcuffs and let me eat if I promised to behave. I was a model citizen all throughout dinner, and when we got back in the car they didn't put the handcuffs back on. A few hours later we stopped for gas. It was dark by then and I asked to use the bathroom. One guy was filling the car with gas, and I noticed the guy who was escorting me to the bathroom was limping badly. I learned later I shattered his kneecap with the stool, so I figured it was my chance to escape. I made a break for it. I had a good head start on the guy pumping gas, and the limping guy couldn't keep up. I ran into the woods next to the gas station and just kept going. There's a lot more to the story, but I'm on mobile, so long story short, I found a road, hitchhiked to the nearest town, and luckily still had my wallet on me to buy a train ticket out of there. I spent the next few months in hiding until I turned 18 and my parents couldn't touch me anymore. Not me, but a cousin of mine was kidnapped as a baby by his aunt and uncle and taken to Australia and raised as their very own child. The kid was born to a middle-income family in a third-world country. My cousin's father's brother was a wealthy man in Australia who has spent the previous year living back home. Him and his wife that could not have children plotted to visit the new baby and claim him as their own, with the father of the child aiding them in the kidnapping. The baby was taken from the mother in the middle of the night, they drugged her, and flown to Australia where the uncle and aunt claimed the child was theirs. This happened in the late 90s, so I'm not sure how they did it, but regardless, the child was never returned to the mother. They ended up telling her where the child was but threatened to have her put in prison and the child up for adoption if she ever spoke out, so she never did. My cousin was raised until 17 years old with his false family until he found the truth by reconnecting with his mother through Facebook. When he turned 18, he confronted his real parents and they admitted everything. The next day he moved out and flew 12 hours to go meet his new family. My grandmother's brother was kidnapped and held for ransom. He's a successful businessman, was held at gunpoint in the parking lot of his office building. Was in the papers and everything, and the photo they used coincidentally had my dad in the background. His claim to fame. It was a month before the kidnappers even made contact with the family to make their demands. These guys were pros, they've done this before and did their research. They knew exactly how much he was worth. It was really tough for us. From his accounts, they never physically harmed him, but he was kept in a dark room the entire time and fed sandwiches. Even got him his medication. Prayer and thinking of his family were the only things that got him through those 3 months. In the end, they caught the guy on top of the operation and they let him go. To say he was traumatized is an understatement. I've never seen a person so broken before. Couldn't even crack a smile. What's insane is that another local businessman has just recently been kidnapped as well.